I'm a child of Mexican immigrants. My parents had very little formal education. They immigrated to this country in 1954. They moved to LA in 1955. They always had the dream of going back to Mexico, but we ended up staying. I have two sisters, one of which is the assistant principal over at East LA Occupational Center. The other, which works at USC and is a graduate of UC Berkeley. So we are, in some ways, kind of the classic immigrant story. I lived in about 8 to 10 different houses when I grew up. I grew up in the Lincoln Heights section of East LA. It was a difficult and challenging process. You, in some ways, were somewhat of an urban nomad. You moved from house to house. I moved from house to house, and somewhat envious and jealous of those friends of mine that I knew that had a more stable physical situation. But you also learned in moving from house to house to be adaptable, to deal with these kinds of challenges without getting overwhelmed by it. But it was a difficult existence. It was poor and working class Mexican neighborhood, but the other side of the coin is that you learned how to handle yourself, and you were able to survive in a tough neighborhood, and anything after that is really downhill. I was extremely young. I was about 12 years old. I was home watching TV when I heard of the assassination of Dr. King. Even though I was young, I understood that it was really a very tragic and important moment. You have to understand that 1968 was a very, very difficult and tumultuous year in the history of America. Robert Kennedy was assassinated that year. There were disturbances at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. 1968 was a very, very difficult year. But the assassination of Dr. King was especially transformative, if you want to call it that, because Dr. King represented and preached the principles of nonviolence. And at the time there was kind of a violent culture that we live in perhaps again today. And so his death signified a real blow to the movement for nonviolence at the time. Cathedral High School at the time was pretty much a all-Latino high school. The irony, of course, was that I was considered what they called at the time a TJ, a Tijuanero. I was more of a Mexican kid than I was a Mexican-American kid. I think it's kind of funny and ironic to think that these working-class kids from Greater East LA would look down upon me because I was the son of Mexican immigrants and spoke with an accent. But there you have it. It was a difficult time for me. I was working full-time. I was working 40 hours a week when I was going to Cathedral, so I wasn't able to partake of all of the activities at Cathedral as much as I would have wanted to. My parents didn't have formal education, but they understood the value of education. And so working hard and working hard at school were things that were going to happen. And so I was lucky enough to be able to do well at Cathedral. And since Spanish was my first language, I was one of those folks that took the AP Spanish exam and got a perfect score, and that was what got me into Yale. Going from Lincoln Heights and East LA to Yale was like going from one world, one country to another. Yale is all of the stereotypes that you think of in terms of the Ivy League and this very preppy, white Anglo-Saxon type of environment were true. They were certainly true when I was there. There were very, very few Latinos in the school at the time, and it was an extremely difficult transition. I was very homesick. And at the same time, it was a very demanding academic curriculum. So the combination of being in a foreign environment and having to perform at a very high level day in and day out was quite a challenge, but I'm certainly very thankful for the fact that I was able to go there. When I was at Cathedral and I applied to the Ivy League, there was an English teacher there who was very critical, very skeptical about my abilities. He fancied himself the best English teacher at the high school, but the man was nothing other than a racist. He came to me and he told me that because English was my second language and because I spoke with an accent, that there was no way that I was going to survive, much less succeed at a place like Yale. I waited for 4 years. I graduated from Yale. I came back. I walked into his classroom. I brought my Yale diploma, and there was a classroom full of students there. I asked him if he remembered me, and he did. And I showed him my diploma, and I reminded him of what it was that he had said. And I turned around and I looked at the students, and I told them to never allow a racist teacher to tell them that they weren't capable, that because they spoke with an accent or because they were the child of Mexican immigrants, that they were not capable. I then turned around and I showed the diploma again to the teacher, and I told him, "Can you read this?" And I said, "Oh, excuse me, you can't. It's in Latin. That's my third language. 2 more that you don't know." And I walked out. When I got back from Yale, it was still a financial challenge for my family, so I was continuing to work full-time and going to law school full-time. So obviously that did not leave a great deal of time for anything else. But in some ways, the fact that I was completely engulfed in doing either work or going to law school really allowed me to focus and to find other discipline. The discipline that I had learned and the academic discipline that I had mastered at Yale served me well in law school, and I was able to work full-time and graduate at the top of my class. Well, I have to confess to you a bias. As you know, I worked on the campaign for the election of Barack Obama for President of the United States. I'm very proud of the fact that he is our president. I think history will judge this as a very transformative moment. I think everybody agrees that it is a transformative moment in American history. From my perspective, the Civil War is finally over. And you had asked me earlier about where I was when Martin Luther King was assassinated. In some ways, I view the election of Barack Obama as the culmination, if you will, of the progress of the African American community here in the United States. Barack Obama stands on the shoulders of people like Martin Luther King. About 10 years ago, I was very fortunate to have a deposition in Memphis, and I took an extra day and I went to the Lorraine Motel, which is where Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I was given a tour by a young African American student who was a member of an African American fraternity who provide those kinds of tours there. And just recently, I was able to go with you to Atlanta, and we were able to see the Ebenezer Baptist Church and to walk through a piece of history. Barack Obama personally, I identify as a person of color, his wife Michelle as well, a graduate of Princeton, as a person of color who went through the Ivy League, who understands what it is to struggle and then do well, and not only do well, but really do incredibly well. It brings me intense pride. To see that young people are going to view an African American as a competent leader is really a powerful statement, no matter how simple that sounds.